In recent decades, many of the prairies known for their tall and abundant brush have evolved toward a less abundant herbaceous and woody vegetation, thus becoming steppes, which at the same time run the risk of morphing into true deserts. They are usually found in regions far from the coast and are characterized by an extremely arid continental climate with great thermal variation between the long and cold winters and the short and hot summers, variations that even occur between day and night. The main limiting factor for life on the steppes is the scarcity of water, a consequence of low annual precipitations that rarely yield 250 millimeters on average. Their grounds are highly underdeveloped. They're rich in minerals, but have little organic substances, which makes them very hard, especially since they have never been plowed by man. The abundance of minerals in the steppes bestows spectacular hues upon their landscapes. Their characteristic red tone is an effect of the abundance of iron oxides that burst to the surface due to intense wind erosion. We also refer to cold deserts as steppes, in contrast to the predominantly torrid deserts like the Sahara. The complex system of landscapes and ecosystems that we know as the Gobi Desert in Asia justifies this denomination. In that inhospitable region, we find the Al-Ashan steppes alongside plateaus like valleys and the Tian Shan cliffs. The steppes of the Iberian Peninsula, which are relatively abundant and are increasing in size, are a peculiar case because of both global warming and mankind-specific desertification processes. The steppes of Spain create wide-open spaces that can be flat or softly undulating, and which are almost completely devoid of trees or developed brush, due to how poor their land is, their high degree of salinity, and an extremely arid Mediterranean climate. They are thus quite different from Central European and American steppes, whose deep land provides for abundant herbaceous and brush vegetation. Their fauna, which is comprised of species adapted to hot summers and cold and dry winters, is in a perpetual state of precarious equilibrium, though herbivores such as the bison, horse, and fallow deer can be found. In the more arid steppes, characterized by harsh winters and brief periods of rain, we find small carnivores such as wolves and foxes, rodents, prairie dogs, and many reptiles, and arthropods that fill the biomass of these open spaces that at times seem completely empty. Even though the advancement of arid areas seems unstoppable, we could mitigate such an advance by properly managing our ecosystems. The example of such catastrophes as the one in the Aral Sea, which has become a saline desert because of the overexploitation and bad management of its natural cycle by man, or of large areas of the African coast, which have seen their fish populations decimated and their formerly prodigious waters converted into ghost boat cemeteries, should alert us to the perils of exerting too much pressure on natural resources, which lead to the disappearance of sources of life for many populations. The vastness of deserts has varied throughout history because of the climate mutations of our planet. For example, 6,000 years ago, the Sahara was a green area in which lush forests and grasslands housed a varied fauna. During a gradual process that spanned 3,000 years, tropical vegetation was progressively reduced until becoming first an arid savanna and then the largest desert on our planet. The presence of numerous anchorites in these lands shows that in the beginning of Christianity, life in the desert was possible, even as the likelihood of finding food and water diminished progressively over time. When Arab colonizers arrived, they found a familiar ecosystem, similar in many ways to the one in the Arabian Peninsula from whence they'd come. We mustn't forget that Sahara in their language means desert. There are very few vestiges left of a varied vegetation as witnesses of its Mediterranean past, though most of these are in the form of palm trees found in oases and are the byproduct of Arab colonization. Palm trees are unusual plants that can reach 20 meters high. They are quite resistant, can easily adapt to all types of land, and can be found alone or in groups. Their exquisite dates provide nutrition. They offer shade to men and beasts, and they supply fibers that can be woven. But above all, they recall the illusion of the Garden of Allah in such an arid environment. A Saharan oasis is an isolated stopping point that offers water and vegetation, a type of rare fertile island in the middle of the sand. Small human settlements can be found in it thanks to an agricultural technique well adapted to this land. Historically, oases served as places for provisions and rest stops for caravans crossing the Sahara in an effort to communicate Black Africa with the Christian nations of Europe. Even today, the tea ceremony reminds us of the peoples born from oases and to what extent these are welcome rest spots for travelers. Scientific data reveals that the desert has been inexorably advancing in recent decades, and that it even affects areas beyond those that are potentially naturally arid, as shown by the desertification of certain areas close to rivers near the Mediterranean and in Central Asia. The time has come to be permanently alert to the consequences of our abusive exploitation of the planet, so that those areas that today are tropical rainforests don't one day become deserts. The Amazon now has very poor land quality because of the devastation of its biological wealth. It could go from being the lungs of the earth to a desolate area. In fact, every year, thousands of hectares of forest are destroyed, and the only cause of this ever-growing disaster is human ambition. These images show the catastrophic consequences of the great planetary equilibrium breakdown caused by pressure from mankind, who is causing global warming, climate change, and an unforeseen chain of perverse consequences. The degradation of nature and the loss of biodiversity are the results of crimes committed by men upon Mother Gaia. Threatened species are thus the thermometers of such anthropic barbarism exerted on our planet. But mankind does not always behave like a predator. There are peoples who have adapted to their environment, exploiting it in traditional, sustainable ways, consistent with their nomadic way of life. There are races whose physique is, even today, adapted to such an extreme milieu, such as the Kung forest people, who populate the fringes of African deserts. Organized into small groups in which individuals work together, they still conserve a similar genome to that of the first humans who abandoned Africa to colonize the rest of the world. Traditionally linked to hunter-gathering activities, their natural habitats are the dry and semi-deserted steppes of Africa. Economic changes and demographic pressure on their ancestral territories has forced them to accept pastoral forms of life as a way to ensure their survival.